Hey there folks, and welcome back to another Let's Talk About video where I discuss and sort of review games I'm playing. Today we got a big one to talk about, the Elden Ring DLC, Shadow of the Erd Tree. Lots of discussion going on around with this DLC, and there's kind of a lot to talk about, so let's just dive into this. Of course, this is going to contain spoilers, so you've been warned, but also I was pretty slow at finishing the game, so you should all be done by now. I'm going to start with the story, and then promptly stop because I'm not going to pretend to understand the story, especially when I didn't really pay much attention to the item descriptions or words that NPCs were saying. I'll watch a lore video on that later, but some people were pretty hyped about the story and the lore that was added in this DLC, so that's cool for them. I don't particularly play most games for a story, so it doesn't matter to me much either way, but cool, it's there. I'll check it out later. I mean, I like the lore, I'm just not going to, do it in-game. Now for reals though, let's start with the world and the exploration part of the DLC. Now previously, before the DLC launched, Miyazaki had said that the DLC was about the size of Limgrave, and that was bullshit. This DLC is absolutely huge. It's much larger than Limgrave, and there's a good 30 plus hours of content and areas to explore, and that's not counting how much time you might spend on bosses. There's just a ton of land to cover, items to discover, and which is great, but it's also not so great at sometimes. While most of the areas in the DLC are amazing, especially the castles and the dungeons, the overworld map tends to have a lot of areas with nothing in them, and suspiciously nothing. I was thinking okay, there has to be something around here, I have to be missing something, this has to be used for something, there's something going on, and it was always nothing. So I ended up spending a lot of time, or actually wasting a lot of time is a better way to put it, because I was trying really hard to look under every rock and crevice for every little item or thing I'd never use. Areas like the Abyssal Woods, the Finger Ruins, and the Dragon Peak are huge sections of the map that felt like wasted space because there's nothing in them. But now, overall, that is a pretty minor complaint. Who complains about too much stuff, right? But it is pretty empty. I just feel like the DLC could have been condensed better and have a more compact feeling experience without so much time running around feeling like I'm missing something. And honestly, that's probably the only complaint I have about the general exploration, the map, and the whole area of the DLC in general. It's just that some areas are pretty empty, rushed or just not done. Negativity aside there's tons of incredibly gorgeous areas like the Cerulean Coast, Charo's Hidden Grave, and the Jar Prison Gale things. And despite the relatively last-gen resolutions, and Elden Ring not actually natively supporting ultra-wide displays, it still looks absolutely stunning. They had a great job with the lighting and the foliage, and of course the art direction is still top-notch. And while I do love the presentation, the performance kinda is hit and miss. My PC is pretty solid, being on a 3070 Ti and a 10th Gen i9 processor, so of course the game runs well, but there are still plenty of hiccups and crashes that happen from time to time. I'm unsure how the performance has been on console, but PC can be pretty iffy at times, and that does kind of dampen the experience a bit. I think the performance of Elden Ring has always been kind of mid, and I don't really expect significant changes to that in the future, so it kind of is what it is, I'm guessing. The negative reviews that are complaining about the performance of the DLC are valid and justified in my opinion, though I never felt it to be so extreme that it would make me want to write a negative review, but that's just my experience. It was kind of meh, but it's not absolutely terrible. I got through the game just fine. Now, speaking of my experiences with the DLC, I did want to talk about that and the big narrative around the DLC difficulty. So let's start with my playthrough first. Now, I did this entirely with bow and crossbow. I did use throwing weapons, which are sick as fuck, by the way. They're some of the best additions they've had. Just because some of the trash enemies I wanted to save arrows on, and I kind of wanted to play around with them. But all the bosses were entirely done with bow and crossbow, and most of the clearing was with bow and crossbow. I had done this playstyle as well in the base Elden Ring game, and it was pretty miserable in the initial playthrough as maintaining arrow stocks and consumables. It was pretty much a nightmare. Though I did go back to New Game Plus and did a pretty much a no-hit run on all the Remembrance bosses with bow, and having established gear and consumables definitely makes subsequent playthroughs with bow much better. So going through the DLC with bow and crossbow only wasn't anywhere near as bad as base game, because you kind of already had your established build and your equipment there to go and all your consumables. The DLC also added a lot of things for bow users. Pre-patch added some actual damage scaling for bows, not a lot but a little bit, and their Ashes of War got improved, like Barrage, Arrow Rain, Radahn's arrow stuff, just really good. They all carried pretty hard in the DLC. And in the actual DLC, we got 2 new bow talismans, one of which was a combo damage and range talisman that did stack with the previous bow damage talisman, which is crazy since typically the two of the same talismans don't stack. And then we also got a talisman for precision shots, which is great. So really, you can actually run like 4 damage talismans now with a bow set, and you can get some pretty nasty damage out of bows, especially when you consider the scatter tree fragments. We also got some amazing new bows in the Bone Bow, which has a homing barrage with Raincore shot, which is amazing. While it's weaker than Black Bow, its consistency with landing shots on moving targets and humanoids made it far more reliable for me. And of course we got the Spread Bow, which just does insane damage for a ranged weapon at the cost of eating 8 arrows per shot, but it's already better than Black Bow anyway. Now, while we did get some new crossbows, I found that like the automatic crossbow took too long to use, and often I just didn't bother using them. I tend to stuck with the spread crossbow just because it blankets enemies with status bolts, and that was a good way to apply status quicker than, you know, a pulley crossbow would, because it's one shot for multiple hits rather than a longer shot animation. So I didn't really use crossbows all that much. We did have some cool stuff here. It was predominantly the new bows that I like, especially Ingen's great bow. God, that thing was a treat. Oh, quick tangent though. Originally, I did start this whole playthrough for the DLC on New Game Plus 7, thinking that I would be fine, but I was also going in blind and had no idea what scatter tree fragments were, if I should spend them, what they did, etc. So the first bosses were literally impossible for me with bow, like the Black Gale Knight being humanoid who could dodge 99% of your arrows since it's a humanoid with infinite stamina and reads all your inputs. That sucks. So I had to do that with daggers since I literally just couldn't finish the fight with 200 arrows. And then same went for Dancing Lion. I just didn't have the damage to clear that fight while also getting one tapped from literally every attack since I was like light armor with soul level 200 on New Game Plus 7. So eventually I just used a mule character to drop the game down to like New Game Plus and continued on from there. It wasn't until much later when I actually discovered what scattered tree fragments like were and that they buffed your stats in the Shadowlands that I realized I probably could have gone through New Game Plus 7 if I had spent time gathering fragments first. But I don't think FromSoft really explained their usage clearly enough, because whenever I pick up an item like that in like a Souls game that looks kind of important, especially when it's a consumable, I never want to use it. I don't know if I need it for a quest later, if it's a one-time use item, if I have to trade it for something, or anything like that. So I just kind of hoarded them for a while. But anyway, I continued the game on New Game Plus and got through Dancing Lion with Bone Bow after like 15 or 20 attempts. I think that the bow playthrough was going to be pretty tough like base game, but when I got to Relana and started using my scatter tree fragments, I was just having too much fun that I wasn't even concerned with the difficulty. Everyone said Relana was like extremely hard, but I found her to be super fun for a bow fight and dispatched with her after just, you know, probably 10 or 20 attempts, which isn't that long really. A lot of the time since I play with light armor, I don't really have the luxury of being able to take hits. I have to dodge everything, so I have to learn to dodge most of the attacks in a fight. I didn't really hit my first wall until I got to Mesmer, who was absolutely fun, by the way. It's insanely fun. This fight took me like 2 or 3 hours to do with the bow because, again, I have to practice and learn all the attacks, as well as when I would have an opening to shoot my bows. And the first phase is absolutely amazing, and I would have loved the second phase too, if not for one attack, which is a snake attack. It's that very specific snake attack that comes out of the ground in front of you, and then it does like 3 bites at you. Like it comes up, and then it hits you, and then it comes back around, and then back one more time. And this attack has hitboxes on the entire snake, not just the head. And so you often get like pushed and stuck into the snake body, even if you dodge the head. And then now you're stuck in a body, which is also the hitbox for the attack for the next bite, and you just get hit anyways. It's just annoying, and I hated it. But that was like the only attack that I didn't like for Mesmer. He is an awesome fight, and I think he's actually the best boss fight in the DLC. I think he's absolutely peak. Now, after I had killed Mesmer, the next day FromSoft put out a patch that boosts the early scatter tree fragment buffs, and I was kind of sad to see that they already buffed the players a few days after launch. It's not significant because eventually it's gonna balance out by the time you get like 20 fragments anyways. But from here, I kind of went and just demolished all the other bosses I faced in just a few attempts. Scatter tree Avatar, General Gaius, Mother Fingers, Romalia, Bale, they're all just going down in just, again, a few attempts, like 1 to 4, which I didn't feel was right. And I wasn't sure if that was because of the buff to the fragments, because, you know, by the end of the game I had about 13 stacks of the buff, and they had made the first 10 the most impactful, which is what the change was. And trust me, I understand why they did it. I get it. But I went from struggling and enjoying all the bosses to just kind of killing them in no time without fully learning their movesets and stuff. So outside of Mesmer, I didn't really have much of an issue with the difficulty of the DLC until I got to the last boss. Radahn definitely kicked my teeth in. Learning phase 1 was super fun, and I really did like that first phase 2, just like Mesmer. But wow, phase 2 was kind of overkill, isn't it? Like every single attack gets like roll catching holy beams after it. It has like some absolutely nutty combos. It relentlessly attacks you, that does crazy damage, and just has insane AoEs. And that was kind of a theme with the whole DLC. Lots of AoEs, lots and lots of AoEs. And I think this was like the only fight where I thought to myself, like, yeah, there's no way I'm going to be able to no-hit this boss. Every other boss in the game and the DLC, I figured I could no-hit when, you know, I actually learned the fights and I can actually get some practice in. But Radahn, nah, I just don't think I'm good enough. Now, I'm not going to say that the fight is unfair. It's hard as shit, but it's been no-hit already, so it's possible. It's just very, very hard. And I'm what I would consider an above average player. I love like no-hit challenges, and I'm pretty good when I practice something. So if I'm out here thinking there's absolutely no way I can do this fight, especially on a no-hit, then I'm sure most people were out there thinking the same thing or just thinking it's straight up impossible. But again, I was doing self-imposed challenges with bow only, no magic, no miracles, no mimic, no summons, nada. And eventually I got him down. It took about 2 hours of attempts, but I was ecstatic when I did because I thought this would be a fight that I wouldn't be able to do. Though I did have to put on a lot of heavy armor, mitigation talismans, eat some boiled crab because I knew I just wouldn't be able to dodge all the attacks. It's just too oppressive. So I did end up face tanking a lot more than I would have liked, and that kind of feels bad to me. But again, we have tools to deal with this stuff. But I got it done, bow only, great time. Now, with my general playthrough experiences out of the way, I do want to chime in on this whole is the DLC too hard debate. And I want you to know that this is coming from a YouTuber, me, who likes to speedrun Monster Hunter. I like challenges, but I also do make guides and informative videos to help explain mechanics and to try to help other players be better. That's kind of what I do. Now, from me, I don't think the difficulty is too much. Even the last boss. The entire franchise was meant to be hard. That's what we were all praising it for since like Demon Souls. Base game Elden Ring was too easy, and I think a lot of people knew that, the devs included, and made the DLC extremely punishing because of it. Now the cool thing about Souls games, Elden Ring included, is that you're entirely in charge of how hard the game is, even ignoring the scatter tree fragments, which I don't expect players to understand like how to use them or how to find them. There are still plenty of tools and things you can do to make bosses easier. You can go for like obscenely overpowered weapons and combos, like the strong jump attacks. You can do shield and stacking damage mitigation, which you can literally just face tank bosses 90% of the time. You can spam bleeds, you can use mimic tears, you can summon NPCs. You could even just do co-op and let other people kill the boss for you. And you have all these tools to gain advantages on every single boss fight. And look, I get it that players come in all sorts of skill ranges, from game journos to Ongbal. But if you can't beat the bosses with stacking ultra tanky gear, sitting behind a tower shield, and summoning other players to do it for you, I mean, maybe you don't deserve to beat the boss then. Maybe it's just that. There's plenty of ways that you can make the fights easier and easier until you're pretty much guaranteed to be done with it if you really wanted to. There's no reason to expect that you deserve victory or should be guaranteed victory, and I don't quite get the participation trophy mentality that's taken over this generation, but I feel like challenges need to be overcome, and if you can't learn patterns, timing, or patience, then you maybe just don't deserve a win. Everyone knows what kind of games these are. You bought the game, you knew what you're getting into, and you should expect them to be challenging. You should expect to have to overcome those challenges. Even though I and pretty much everyone else would agree that Phase 2 of Radahn is a little too much, it's still not infallible. It's not too hard. It's very hard for sure, but not too hard. I was pretty close to giving up my self-imposed challenge, and I was going to summon Ansbach for the aid, but that's an option I had if I felt that I wasn't going to finish the fight with my own restrictions, because for sure it feels overwhelming, like especially there in Phase 2. I just think that it needs to have some sort of visual clutter reduced, and maybe that Holy Bolt roll catching needs to be just reduced in their AoE size a little bit, then I think it would be amazing. But that's just my 2 cents on that fight. But overall though, like I really like the DLC and the challenge it provides. I think it's fair. I don't think it's particularly fair on that one last phase of that last boss fight, but that's just me. But the player has ultimate control over the challenge. But as I mentioned, I'm sure a lot of new players, especially if you're going in blind, don't know about the scatter tree fragments or how to use them, how to farm them, what they're especially for. And I think those probably shouldn't have existed. You should just scale bosses appropriately since it's just numbers below anyways. That's like my other small gripe about the game. I don't like scatter tree fragments. But Shadows of the Erdtree was a very enjoyable game. I mean, it's probably more enjoyable than the base game in my opinion. It was large enough to be its own game and definitely worth the price tag they put on it, which is pretty high. $40 for a DLC is a lot. But every DLC from Soft that has pumped out has been astounding, and they definitely didn't drop the ball on this one either. I am glad I got done with the DLC before they eventually nerf Radahn again, because they 100% will. Too many people are complaining about it. But I had an absolute blast the entire time. So, Anyway, that's going to be all for me. Thank you all for watching. I plan to do like a bow gameplay guide video later, whatever, if you're interested. So watch out for that. But yeah, peace and good luck out there, hunters.